Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's machine learning meetup. My name is Vincent. I'll be your host for today. Um, we have an exciting talk today by Yong Lee about next steps in generalist multimodal models. And basic format of this meetup is we'll have a 40-minute talk. And at the end, we'll have a 20-minute session of question and answers, which will be moderated by Lawrence Zhang. If you have any questions, put them in the QA tool. However, do note that they probably won't be reviewed like asked up until we get to the Q&A session at the end. All right. Without further ado, Yongjae, go ahead.
All right, yeah, thank you. Thank you everyone for joining this talk. I'm really excited to be able to present our lab's recent work on creating, generalist multimodal models. So if we think about computer vision, right, and the progress that we've made in this area over the past maybe 12 years or so, uh, there's been huge amount of progress, right? So many of the almost all the problems that you're seeing on this slide, you can claim has pretty much been solved, right? In many real world cases. So we have now, image classifiers, object detectors that are good enough to be deployed in the real world. And of course, this advancement that we've seen in computer vision research, deep learning research, has led to an explosion in students interested in this area, and startups, and funding, and hiring, and of course, research activities, right? So what you're seeing on this in this image here is a plot, right, that shows the number of submitted papers and accepted papers to CVPR in blue and red, respectively. And CVPR is one of the major computer vision conferences. And you can see that over the past like 5, 6 years, there's been an exponential growth in the number of papers submitted, right? And this trend is continuing, right? So it's not dying down. So this demonstrates, how much activity and excitement there is in this area. Um, However, uh, I'm going to claim that the paradigm that we've been through till very recently has been one of the creation of what I'm going to call specialist models. Okay? So what I mean by specialist models is given a single task, we're going to design a single model that can solve that task very well, okay? But it's not able to solve any other task, right? So for example, uh, uh, for object detection, we have a single a model that we've designed to solve this object detection task, and it does it really well, but it can't solve any other task. Right? As another example, we might have a model that is very good for human pose recognition, but it can't do anything else. Now let's see what the limitations of a specialist model paradigm might be, right? So given this image, suppose we want to have a visually intelligent system that can, help us answer a very simple question like, can I print my documents here? Right? So if you think about, how we might go about doing this with a specialist model paradigm, we might start by trying to train an object detector that can detect indoor objects, right? So we might have to go out and grab an open source object detector, fine tune it on indoor objects, and then we run that detector on this image, and the way it responds is by saying that there's no printer, right? Because the printer is actually not visible here. If it does exist in the scene, it's probably occluded by that red sofa. We're not sure. But the detector tells us that there's no printer. We might also run an OCR engine, right? And the OCR engine will tell us that it's reading business center at this particular spatial coordinate. And because we know that business centers usually have a printer, we might assume that there could be a printer here, but again, we won't be sure, right? So based on the output of the object detector and the OCR engine, when we try to produce some kind of final response to the user, it's quite unclear what to say, right? Because the detector's saying there's no printer. The OCR engine is saying it reads Business Center, so maybe there's a printer, right? So it's quite ambiguous what to say. Right? So in general, right, for open-ended generic tasks, trying to solve those tasks with specialist models is insufficient. Now, in the past few years, we've seen the rise of generalist foundation models. Right? So these are models that are trained on huge internet scale data, typically across multiple modalities like text, images, audio, right? And in this paradigm, we're training a single model that ends up being able to solve many different tasks, right? So if it's some kind of vision model, then it would be able to solve visual question answering, do image captioning, do object recognition, right? And some examples that are well known to us today include models like GPT-4, so it's large language models, vision transformers, image text models like CLIP. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk about um, large multimodal generalist models, and specifically vision language models that can understand visual data and communicate in natural language. When we create these models, ultimately the objective is for them to augment our human capabilities, right? So an important factor here is for them to be steerable or controllable or aligned. They're kind of synonymous. Okay? And so we want them to be steerable and be able to produce desirable outputs for wide internet scale knowledge. Um, and in the latter part of the talk, after I've briefly introduced what multimodal generalist model looks like, I'm going to talk about some next steps in how to have them understand not just text inputs, but also visual prompts, um, how to make them more personalized, and also how to make them more efficient. So let's start by talking about Lava. So this is work that we've created in our lab in collaboration with Microsoft. Um, and it stands for Large Language and Vision Assistance. So this is a generalist model that takes in both an image and some text instruction, right? And then is able to output a text response. Okay? And so it has the capability to understand visual data, follow human instructions, and communicate in natural language. And there are roughly three components to this model. So if we look at the architecture, right, there's a vision encoder that processes the image. There's a language model that can understand text and respond in text. And then there's a projection module that connects the two modalities together, right? And so in Lava, for the vision encoder, we leverage a pre-trained clip VIT. Okay? So this clip VIT will take as input an image, and then we extract features from a layer, so a layer close to the output in a grid-like fashion. Right? So you can think that there's some visual feature for each like patch in the image. And then what the projection module will do is it will convert that feature, so project it into a space in which the language model can now absorb and understand. Okay? So it's tokenizing the visual features into visual tokens. And then we have a language model. And here we start with a pre-trained language model, some variant of llama model, right? That can understand text and respond in text. And the way that we train Lava is in the usual autoregressive next token prediction task, right? So it's very similar to how you would train a large language model, except the difference is when you're trying to predict the next text token, you're conditioning it not just on the previous text tokens, but also on all of the visual tokens as well, so that this model can not only understand text, right? Not only understand like what a question it means, but also refer to the image while trying to answer that question. Um, and so with Lava, you can do some interesting things, right? So if you give it this image and you ask this question, what is unusual about this image? Then it responds by saying that the unusual aspect of this image is a man ironing clothes on the back of a minivan or van. It's just not a typical place to perform this activity. It says something about how it can be unsafe and unconventional. So it has very strong visual reasoning capabilities. Uh, this is an example that I particularly like. So if you give it this image and say, what may be the purpose of this painting? Then it actually understands that it's some parodied version of the Mona Lisa by Leonardo da Vinci, right? And it says that the artist has painted a dog in the same pose as Mona Lisa, and it's likely to be a creative and humorous take on the iconic painting. Another really interesting thing about these generalist models is that they have emergent capabilities. So as an example, uh, if you give this image to Lava and ask a question in Chinese, and the English translation would be something like, "What is the name of this area?" Then it can respond in Chinese, despite the fact that in the training data, we never actually had um, a visual question answering format in Chinese. So anytime there was a question about an image, it was always in English, and it was always answered in English. We did have just text-only Q&A in other languages, including Chinese, but we never had a setting where it was, a question was asked in Chinese about an image and answered in Chinese, right? So these kind of capabilities actually emerge in these generalist models. Another example is OCR. So even without explicit OCR training data, uh, the model will actually acquire the capability to read text that's imprinted on an image because many of the questions will require the model to do that. So since we released Lava in April 2023, we made several extensions to it. And so the first major extension that we made was published in CVPR this past summer is called Lava 1.5. So what we did here was basically we scaled up in along three axes. Okay, so the first thing we did was we scaled up the training data and the quality of the training data. Second thing is we made the model bigger, so more higher capacity model. And then the third thing we did was we increased the image resolution that can be read in by this model, right? And higher image resolution is important uh, when you have a situation where in the image there's lots of text written or there's lots of small objects, right? And so when you scale up the data, the model, and the input image resolution, you can get much better results. So that's what we demonstrated in this work. And then further pushing along the scaling direction, right? For again, data, model, and image resolution, we released Lava Next, also known as Lava 1.6, earlier this calendar year in January. And at least at the time when we released this model, it was getting competitive results with even compared to proprietary models like Gemini Pro. Of course, the models that we have today are much better, right? So Gemini Pro would be doing way better than what you're seeing here. There's other proprietary models that do better as well. But when we released this model at that time, it was quite exciting because this was an open source model majorly developed within a university setting, right? That could be quite competitive with a proprietary model. And since then, right, so if we kind of see like the community efforts in this space of creating large multimodal models, um, uh, OpenAI released GPT-4 Vision in March of 2023, and we released Lava around mid-April. And we were one of the first two uh, open source models in this space. The other one was Mini GPT-4. And then just like 10 days after Lava was released, there were already works that were already comparing to Lava. And then since then, there's just been an explosion in this space um, where people have tried to better understand the limitations and strength of these models, try to expand their capabilities in terms of, for example, being able to understand other kind of modalities like audio and video. Um, creating better benchmarks to evaluate these models. So there's lots of exciting work in this space, and again, just too many to fit in one slide beyond June of 2023. So in our lab, we've also tried to, we've been very excited about this direction, and we've been exploring various different sort of extensions to this basic sort of foundational work that we have. And the first thing that we were interested in was this question, right? That can we have a large multimodal model that, not only understands like whole images and can answer questions about whole images, but can also understand specific regions or even like visual prompts that a user has provided. Like, for example, if a user draws on the image like an arrow or a scribble, can we have these models understand those things, right? And one of the reasons why we felt the need for doing this was because if you try to describe everything in text, right, anything that's visual in text, it's quite hard, right? So a much more natural way would be for a user to be able to just draw things, right? Um, and so the model that we created for tackling this is called Visual Prompting Lava, or ViP-LLaVA for short. Okay? And at a high level, it looks something like this. So it's very similar to the Lava-like architecture, except um, for the input, right, on the image, a user can actually draw on it, right? So they can, for example, draw a red arrow, right? And we want the model to be able to understand not just the image and the text, but also what that drawing means. And of course, given the popularity of this space and AI in general, when we started, there were no other works that were doing this, but as we were going and working on it, on arXiv, we found works coming up that were trying to, tackle a similar problem. And so there were attempts to try to um, encode any kind of region with the spatial coordinates of the region using text, creating a new kind of region of interest module, or having positional embeddings or vocabularies learned specifically to describe a region. But all of these other works were limited to understanding just bounding boxes, right? So they couldn't understand free-form visual prompts like scribbles or arrows. And so with ViP-LLaVA, it can understand those free-form visual prompts. And the basic idea is very, very simple. So what we're going to do is we have our image, we have our user prompt, right, visual prompt. We're just going to overlay the visual prompt directly on the image, right? And that's it. We're going to give that as input to the model. So no special like architectural changes needed. And one of the reasons why we kind of thought that this might work was because in ICCV 2023, there was work from another group that showed that Clip already has this kind of capability, right? And because in these large multimodal models, many of them use the Clip vision encoder, including Lava and ViP-LLaVA. We thought that, okay, if Clip already has this kind of capability to understand basic visual prompts, then we could probably make a Lava-like model doing something similar, right? And in that ICCV 2023 paper, they explained that the reason why Clip can have this kind of capability is because on the internet, there are many, many images that already have these kind of visual prompts. For example, if there's an image of a missing person, usually there's going to be like a red circle circled around that person's face, right? So this is what ViP-LLaVA's architecture looks like. Again, it's very, very, it's basically the same as the Lava architecture with just some tiny differences. So as input, we have our input image, and we alpha blend the visual prompt, okay, so to create one merged image. That goes into the Clip image encoder. We have our text prompt, right? And then which gets tokenized, and the language model conditioned on both the text tokens and the visual tokens will respond in text. Um, just one tiny sort of implementation detail that's different from Lava is that in ViP-LLaVA, the Clip image encoder, we use it to extract features across multiple layers. And the reason why we do this is because these visual prompts can sometimes be very very narrow and not occupying a lot of pixels. So we found that having a multi-scale sort of representation is better for capturing the details of the visual prompt. But otherwise, it's basically the same architecture as Lava. And in terms of different, what kind of visual prompts ViP-LLaVA can understand, they're the following, what you're seeing here, right? Mask, contour, ellipse, bounding box, triangles, scribbles, points, arrows, and masks. And the way we train our model is we leverage existing region level recognition and reasoning data sets. Okay? And these data sets already have mask annotations and bounding box annotations. So what we do is to get other kinds of visual prompt annotations, like, for example, an arrow, we use some heuristics to, yeah, we use some heuristics. For example, if there's a bounding box, right, well, to create an arrow, what we can do is, for example, sample the center point of the box, sample any other point, connect the two, and then draw like an arrow, right? So that's how we generate these different visual prompt training data, and then we train our ViP-LLaVA using Q&A style data. Okay, so once you've trained ViP-LLaVA, it can do things like this, right? So you give it this image and you ask among the regions with red, blue, and green circles, which two share the same content? And it responds by saying the two regions with the same content are the red and blue circles, right? Both contain a train. Here's another interesting example. So the question in both cases is identical. It's the same identical image. The only difference is that the arrow is pointing in different directions. So if you ask, describe the instance pointed to by the red arrow, right? And in this case, the red arrow is pointing to the blue person. Right? Our model responds, a person in a blue jacket and black pants is standing on skis in the snow. And then for the second one, you ask the same question. It says a woman in a white jacket and white pants, right? So it's understanding the different directions of the arrows. This is a pretty interesting example. So if you give it this image, right, which has these three marks, right, visual prompts, object one, object two, and this yellow ellipse, and you ask what is contained in the circle glass, the model responds, the glass within the ellipse appears to contain a clear liquid, which is likely water. If you follow up and say, describe what is object one and object two, it says object one is a bottle of water, object two is a bottle of beer, right? That's correct. And then if you further follow up and say, what is in the circled glass, right? The stuff within the circle belongs to object one or object two. And it responds and says the stuff within the circle is the liquid from object one, which is water. So it not only understands the visual prompts and the image and the question, but it's able to reason about these things as well. Uh, Quantitatively, at least at the time of submission, we did demonstrate state-of-the-art results on recognition, counting, and captioning, and common sense reasoning for image regions. Given how much again, how much work there is in this general area, I would expect on archive, these much better methods now. Okay? Um, but nonetheless, we think that this is a very, very interesting and important problem. So we did also, as part of the work, create a visual prompt understanding benchmark. Okay? So in this benchmark, there's 303 questions testing various capabilities of these large multimodal models. And essentially, all of these questions do have visual prompts, right? That's the key sort of differentiating factor compared to other benchmarks. And as an example, if you kind of see this image, right, there's three bounding boxes in different colors. The question is, which one has the lowest price? The fruit within the red rectangle, blue rectangle, or green rectangle? Respond with the name of the fruit. Okay? And so for a question like this, there's various capabilities that you're evaluating the model on, right? So the model needs to do OCR, right? It needs to be able to read these characters. It needs to be able to do basic math, compare the numbers to see which one's lowest, right? And then it also needs to be able to recognize that this is orange, right? Yeah, so this was one of the extensions that we had made in the space of large multimodal models. Another direction that we were quite excited about is personalization. So uh, these models by default don't have the ability to say anything personal about the user, right? So, and that makes sense because the training that the data that they were trained on doesn't, typically would not have any kind of personalized training data for any given user, right? So it can say something about celebrities maybe, but for any like arbitrary person, it wouldn't be able to say much, right? So for example, if you give this image to a model like Lava and you ask, can you see if Thou is in this photo? It's not going to have any idea like, who is Thou, right? And it won't be able to respond in a sensible way. Whereas we think that personalization would be very, very useful. So what we would like is for a model to be able to, understand like who or what, this special object is, this concept is, and then respond in a reasonable way, right? And so towards that effort, we created this model called YOLAVA, which stands for Your Lava. And the setting in YOLAV is the following, right? So we want to enable large multimodal models to recognize and reason about personalized subjects. And importantly, we're assuming that if a user is going to provide any training data for some personalized subject, usually they're not going to provide lots of training data, right? So it might just be a handful of images about a person, right? So it's a few shot setting, right? And we want the model to learn from just a handful of images what this personalized subject is. And then once it's done that, we want it to be able to do the following things, right? We want it to be able to recognize that subject in any new image. We want it to be able to answer questions about that subject, both when the image is present as well as when it's not, right? So it should have a general idea of what thou or this concept is, and then be able to say something about, that subject, like, does thou usually wear glasses, even when there's no reference image during test time. And so the way that the OLAVA does this is the following. Okay? It learns we have a learnable prompt. Okay, this is the key sort of idea that we're going to have this a set of learnable tokens. The one of them being the concept identifier, like thou, right? And then a set of k latent tokens, which are going to be learned to essentially describe, right, the various like visual properties about this concept. And the way that we train these tokens is in the following manner, right? So we include this learnable prompt in the system prompt, and then we'll ask a question like, "Can you recognize thou in this photo?" Um, and give the model this image, and then we have our ground truth response, like, "Yes, thou is indeed in the photo," right? And the architecture that we have is it's identical to Lava. Um, but we want to make sure that while this model acquires the capability to understand this new subject, we don't want it to forget about anything else, right? We want it to retain all of the good properties that it had of understanding, having kind of wide scale knowledge. Um, so we don't want to lose that property, right? And so the way that we kind of try to ensure that that doesn't happen is we freeze almost all of the weights of the pre-trained lava model. And we're only training these learnable tokens, right? And the final layers weights that go into this new concept, right? So that needs to be trained because the model has never seen this token. But those are the only things that are learned, right? So we're extending the vocabulary to include the new learnable prompt, right, token. But everything else is frozen. And again, the reason for this is because we wanted to not forget about all the things that it already knew about. So we can, because we're only training very few parameters, we can do this very efficiently, right? And then once you've trained YOLAVA, it can do things like this, right? So you give this image, and by the way, this text is not embedded in the image. I just added this as a kind of reference to the viewers, right? So it would just be the raw image without any text. And then if you ask if you ask this question, hey, can you see Thao and Bo in this photo? Could you write a cute Facebook caption for it? With Lava, it will say something like, in the photo, I see a person and a dog, right? Because it doesn't know what Thao and Bo is. With YoLava, it says I can see Thao and Bo. Um, it it says like Thao is holding Bo, right? So it understands who is Thao, who is Bo, and then is also able to create a Facebook caption, which clearly indicates that it understands that Bo is a dog, right? Okay, so this was the second sort of extension that we had made. And then another final extension that I want to talk about is how to create more efficient models, right? Um, why is efficiency important in the context of multimodal models? Well, typically with these multimodal models, when it's processing the image, right? Depending on the image resolution, there can be either hundreds or even thousands of tokens that get generated from just a single image. And if you want to have, for example, a large multimodal model that can understand now, let's say like videos that are tens of minutes long or even hours long, right? There's just going to be way too many tokens for the model to process. And that's going to have implications on memory, compute, right, and speed. Um, so ideally, we'd like to somehow reduce the number of tokens that these models can need to process. And for images and visual content, that sort of makes sense because not every, not like, so the different images have different complexities, right? There's some images that are very simple, some images that are complicated. So you would imagine that for the simpler images, you might be able to just encode it with very few tokens. Whereas with more complicated images, you might need a lot more, right? Based on this idea, we developed this framework called Matryoshka multimodal model, inspired by the Matryoshka Russian dolls, where you can kind of in uh, recursively like keep inserting a smaller doll into each other, right? And so the idea with Matryoshka multimodal models is we want to have our multimodal model learn a nested set of visual token sequences. Okay? Some of those tokens will be shorter, some of them will be longer, but it's going to be like this nested representation. Um, and the idea is that uh, if we learn this kind of nested representation, then during inference, depending on the memory and compute requirements, a user can select which of those lengths that they would want or need, right? Um, and the way that we do this in Matryoshka multimodal model is we do the simplest thing. We tried other things, but the simplest thing worked the best for us. Okay? And what we did was we just do gradual average pooling, right? So given a layer in the clip image encoder, we have a grid like uh, set of visual features, right? We're just going to do average pooling successively to create these different sequences, right? And then each of those sequences will get inputted to the large language model and trained using the standard autoregressive next token prediction, right? Um, and so once you've trained in this way, right, each of these different visual sequences, token sequences, try to describe the image, right, to different amounts of detail, right? But again, the idea is that during inference, then you can actually choose which of these sequences you want, right? And this work was inspired by some earlier work from another group, which showed that you can do something like this for feature vectors, right? So given a feature vector, you can learn this kind of nested representation. We're doing it in the token sequence dimension. So once you've trained Matryoshka multimodal model, if you ask a question like, describe this image for me, given this image, then you can see that with the shortest sequence, it says something about the image, but with a coarser level of detail. And then with the longest sequence, it will provide a lot more details. And quantitatively, we find that compared to different alternatives, so what I'm showing you here is on the x-axis, the number of visual tokens. On the y-axis is performance on Bench. So here we want higher is better, and then towards the left means more efficiency, right? Because the model's using fewer tokens. And what we find is that with M3 shown in this blue curve, with just 9 or 36 tokens, we can get similar performance as the original Lava using all 576 tokens on this Bench data set. Um, we do find that for data sets or test images where there's a lot of text written, so that requires a lot of OCR, let's say, generally you do require more tokens. And this is also true again if you have like complex images with lots of objects, typically you'll need more tokens. Okay, so given I've talked about these various different extensions and generalist multimodal models. So can we sort of if we think ahead, right, and ask this question that if we just continue in this kind of direction of just scaling these models, right, will visual understanding eventually be solved, right? Um, and it's hard to say, okay, maybe, maybe not. But for now, at least, what I can definitively say is that we're sort of nowhere near that, right? And even though these models have lots of amazing capabilities, they also fail in very, very sort of limited ways, right? Um, so one of the weaknesses of current multimodal models is spatial understanding. So if you give GPT-4o this image, and I tried this a few months ago, so now it might actually work better on this particular image, but nonetheless, it still has weaknesses in spatial reasoning. But anyways, when you give it this image and ask this question, which caption corresponds to it, right? The first choice is a pink scoop on top and a blue scoop on bottom. Second is a pink scoop on bottom and a blue scoop on top. GPT-4o thinks that the pink scoop is on the bottom, right? Um, so spatial reasoning is a weakness of these models. Counting is another weakness. Um, Attribute binding, so understanding like which attributes are going with which objects in the image, that's another weakness. So there are many, many weaknesses that these models have. And so there's still a long way to go. But of course, there have been attempts at trying to improve those basic capabilities in these models, including some work that we, from our group, called Counter Curate, where we try to synthesize hard negative training data so as to force these models to better understand, spatial relationships between objects, counting, and so on. So if you're interested, you can check this work out. Um, and looking forward, there's I think a lot of exciting and interesting research that can be done, both in terms of improving the capabilities of these models, as well as trying to better understand the limitations and strength of these models. In terms of capabilities, right, these models do hallucinate. And I'm going to talk about some of these capabilities in the ensuing slides. Video understanding, I think, is another really exciting and important direction. How do we create smaller models that are just as performant as the larger ones? Creating multimodal agents. And then in terms of understanding, right, why do these emergent behaviors occur in these models, right? How does instruction tuning affect the knowledge that these models have gained through pre-training, right? And I think another really, really important question is, in these multimodal settings, like when should language actually be inserted versus vision? Because with humans, right, we actually start with, uh, um, learning about our visual world, about the physical world, and then language gets inserted later. But many of the state-of-the-art models that we have today start with a language-based foundation and then add other modalities, right? So I think understanding the implications of that, is it better to actually start with another modality like vision right? I think that's still a very big open question. In terms of hallucination, so one of the reasons why this happens in large multimodal models is the following. Okay? Um, Typically, we have to have human annotators create our training data to train our model, right? And when human annotators are seeing an image, they're seeing that image with their perfect human vision, right? So for this example, they're going to be able to read all of these characters, right? And then if you ask a human annotator to caption this image, they might say, this image shows a menu of a coffee shop called Rolly's Cafe, right? Because they can read everything here. Now, based on that caption, you might create some Q&A automatically, like what is the name of the shop? And then the correct answer will be Rolly's Cafe. The problem is that with our large multimodal models, right, their vision encoder may not actually have perfect vision, right? The resolution that they have may actually be something like this. So they cannot actually read all of these tiny characters. Um, and so when you do supervised fine tuning, right? Now what's going to happen is you're sort of forcing the model to spit out an answer that it just has no capability in being able to do. And what that means is you're encouraging the model to guess, right? Um, and so this is one of the reasons why hallucinations happen in large multimodal models. Um, Again, with smaller models, I think this is very, very exciting direction. So there's lots of efforts in this space. One of the most notable efforts has been from Microsoft in the creation of these phi models. And what they show is that if you have very, very high quality data, right, training data, um, then with a relatively smaller amount of high quality training data, you can train a smaller model that is as good as a much larger model that has been trained on lots more noisier data, right? So I think this is very, very exciting that that if we get better quality data, then with smaller amounts, we can train smaller models. And I think this would be, I think this would open up a lot of interesting applications, both commercially as well as in terms of research academically, right? Because I think with smaller models, academics and university environments will be able to play a bigger role. And then finally, with multimodal AI agents, I think this is also a very, very exciting direction. So the idea here is that you have like a brain or some kind of like command center, and that's um, the role of that the LLM or some large vision model, right, multimodal model like Lava will act as that brain, and then uh, what it can do is it can call other tools. Like if it sees that for this task, it needs to, for example, do precise calculation. It might, call a calculator. It might do web search, and it might be able to collaborate with other models, be able to self-reflect on its response, right? Instead of just spitting it out in one shot and do planning. So I think this is a very, very exciting direction that I expect to see, lots of research activities in the next couple of years. Okay, so to conclude, um, we've started moving from this paradigm of creating specialist models to generalist models, where you have a single model that can solve many different tasks, right? An important feature that we want in these models, because we want them to augment our human capabilities, is for them to be steerable and controllable and be safe, right? And I've talked about Lava as one of these foundational models, and then how to extend a model like Lava so that it can understand visual prompts, be personalized, and how it can become more efficient by learning adaptive visual token sequence lengths. So the code and models for these projects that I described are available on these links. And I want to thank all my wonderful collaborators, and in particular, the students that, former and current students that led the projects that I talked about. And with that, I'd be very happy to take any questions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you for that talk. Um, we'll go over to the Q&A session of this meetup. If you want to ask your question personally, raise your hand, and then Lawrence can just say your name, and we'll give you some space to ask your question yourself. Otherwise, you can still use the Q&A tool. If it's all right with you, Lawrence, I'll kick off the Q&A with one question, and then afterwards I'll leave it all up to you. You said that these weaknesses of these models are like counting and spatial reasoning locations. It's something I definitely have encountered in my work and my research as well. I was wondering, in your opinion, how much of this is to blame on how the visual encoder has been trained?
Yeah, I think that's I would say that's probably the main reason. Maybe it might be even the only reason. So one of the reasons why, this happens when you use a model like Clip, right? The way that Clip is trained is it's trained to match images and text, right? In a contrastive learning manner, right? And so the problem with that is that when you're doing contrastive learning, you create a batch of image text pairs. Um, but many times, because this is randomly sampled, you're um, many times you're not going to get another image that has the kind of that forces the model to learn certain, properties. So for example, with that ice cream example, right? What you would like is in that batch for there to be another image of an ice cream where instead of the pink scoop being on top, it's on the bottom this time. And in that way, now Clip, when it's doing contrastive learning, it will learn that, okay, in order, the reason why this sentence and this image matches is because it's describing the pink scoop to be on top, right? And then it's learning what top means and bottom means. But instead, what usually happens is all the other images are like maybe not even about ice cream. So then if you're training Clip to match the image with the text, it's going to just learn some kind of shortcut, and as soon as it sees ice cream, it will know that this is a positive pair, right? A good match. So I think that's one of the key reasons why this happens. And of course, there have been works showing that if you, for example, um, uh, rely not just on image text matching, but have, for example, image captioning loss on top of that, you can do better reasoning. So I think it's a combination of both the objective functions that we use to train these models, as well as the training data. And in our counter curate model paper that I alluded to very briefly, there what we did was we purposely synthesized these hard negatives so that a model like Clip and Lava is forced to understand, the difference between top and bottom, like, when it's counting like 2 versus 3 and so on.
I think that was an awesome response. Um, I guess I'll proceed with the Q&A now. There's a bunch of questions here. Um, First question, pretty simple. Someone's asking about when training the model, was only the language encoder and decoder tuned? And I want to ask more generally, like what different ablations did you run on or decide um, what to train and what not to train, and what you found worked and didn't work? I'm interested to hear about that.
Yeah, yeah. So in the Lava series, when we first started off, we only trained the language decoder and the projector, and we froze the vision encoder. But in our later versions of Lava, we also fine-tuned the vision encoder. So generally, when you have sufficient amount of data, um, training everything tends to be better. It's not always the case, but it tends to be better. There are also papers that study this quite extensively, like the ablation studies that you mentioned, like, is freezing the vision encoder better than unfreezing it? Um, uh, yeah, like, what should the projection module be? Because there's also variance there, right? There's like, we started off with a linear layer, and then we extended that to an MLP with multiple layers. And then there's other works that use things like Qformer. So some yeah. So but one thing that I think we found from our work and then from seeing what others have been doing in this space, these models like CLIP and the LLM, right, pre-trained LLM, despite having some weaknesses, are still very, very capable. So a lot of the like knowledge is already there, and the instruction tuning is kind of digging out that knowledge and sort of steering the model in a way that it can respond right to specific questions in the appropriate way, but it's not really acquiring a lot of new knowledge during the instruction tuning phase. So if you think in that way, a lot of the reason why simple kind of, let's say, simple connector, for example, just works is because yeah, that knowledge is already sort of there in those in the LLM and vision encoders weights. You just need to kind of dig it up in the right way.
Mhm. I had a personal question of mine, because I'm biased. I work on multimodal agents. I see a lot of your work has to do with curating data to
Yep.
cover kind of blind spots. So what do you think about curating data for agents? How does that look like? Um, and I guess what do you think is the future in that?
Yeah, that's a great. So I'll ask it in kind of two different ways. So at a high level, I think if we do, there is something kind of unsatisfying about the data curation, which is um anytime we kind of observe some kind of weakness, right? Like let's say counting, right? Then one kind of obvious way to improve that is now to get training data that forces the model to learn about counting. But if we kind of follow this kind of strategy, then I think we're probably gonna it's just not a scalable solution, right? Because there's gonna be all sorts of different kind of weaknesses that just it's gonna be never ending. So I think figuring out how to kind of get beyond that and being able to because the internet scale data, there's already, I think, tons of data out there. So all of that kind of information should be extracted with what we already have. And instead of having to for example, annotate data, if we can figure out how not to do that, how to do it in a minimally supervised manner, I think that would be a much more promising direction. In terms of multimodal agents, so personally, I have not worked very extensively in this space, so it's hard for me to like concretely say, what the data creation process might, look like moving forward beyond, what people have already done. But yeah, yeah. I mean, I would imagine, that would also be at least following the current paradigm, depending on like the various different tasks that, you're expecting these agents to do, there would be more like appropriate data, right? And then figuring out how to sort of, automate that again without having to have like a human go through, the task and sort of create, what that kind of correct trajectory looks like. I think being able to avoid those kind of things, I think would be very, very important and promising.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. Someone asked in the chat, what do you think about these multimodal models ability to infer causality? So understanding a common strip in an event caused by a prior event. So I guess
Yeah.
causality in multimodal models.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, there definitely is, I would say they don't lack this ability entirely, right? So we do see for example, I mean, we don't really, I think the space of video understanding is still sort of not as mature as, image understanding. And there are attempts at, there's lots of activity in that space too. But with some of these like video understanding models, you do see indication that these models do have the ability to reason about, causal things, but it's not, um, uh, yeah, I think there's definitely a lot more to do there. In terms of the specific example about the comic strip, yeah, that part I didn't quite understand that specific example, but I guess maybe the person who's asking this is saying like you would only understand the comic strip if you understood some prior event that's relevant to it. Yeah, I mean, it I like I haven't tried this particular example, but you know, based on what I've seen, with at least in terms of being able to understand different events, I think these models do pretty well there.
Yeah, there's a person in the chat with their hand raised. Seems like they want to ask a question.
Yeah, he should be able to ask now.
I think, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah, I put my question in the chat anyway. So I'm just curious. There are a lot of foundation segmentation models. Can we use them to fine tune and create something like Lava, or is it or does it have to be from the ground up? How does it work?
Yeah. So with Lava, we actually did exactly that, right? We're not starting from scratch. We start with a clip vision encoder. We start with a pre-trained LLM, right? And then we're fine-tuning them, right? We're kind of putting them together, but we're fine-tuning them. So I think you know, that I think is the correct thing to do. It costs a lot and to train these foundation models from scratch, right? Most like definitely academic labs will not have that, you know, those kind of resources. But even most of the industry labs will not have the resources, right? In order to train a foundation model from scratch. So I think a better way is, you know, to leverage foundation models that are out there. You know, thankfully, like Meta has been very good at releasing their models, and you know, building off of them, fine-tuning them, I think is the way to go.
I think we have let's move to one more question here. Someone is asking about the personalization of tokens. That paper. They're asking if you're able to just train a small block or a layer. I'm guessing they say network here, but in the maybe the LLM, and to have a special layer or block to be exclusively used by personal data. Like, did you guys try that, or do you think there's any issues with that method?
I see. Yeah. So, I mean, if you were to train, let's say, a new layer, that might, so ultimately what we want this model to do is to learn about this new subject and be able to integrate that new knowledge uh, into, you know, the knowledge that it already has, right? So if you actually just train a new layer, that might get in the way of doing that, right? Because I mean, depending on how you do it, that might cause the model to not respond properly about previous things, right, that it knew. So you can get what's called like catastrophic forgetting. So you'll have to be sort of very careful about how you actually insert this new block. And probably, you know, it could be done in a way that could work. But I think that the way that we did it is probably one of the simplest ways, because all we're doing is we're learning these new tokens, right? Um, and then that's kind of, you know, that's just going into the model as input. And essentially the model itself is not being changed, right? So that kind of almost guarantees that the model retains all of its knowledge while being able to understand this new concept.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for the talk, Yong Lee, and the moderation, Lawrence Zhang. This was a great talk, if I say so myself. Just to say that this recording will be put up on our YouTube channel, which you can easily find by typing in London Machine Learning Meetup in YouTube, and you can see all of our previous recordings there as well. So once again, thank you for joining us, and thank you for the talk. Have a nice evening.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.